The Free Market Coalition meeting in Stockholm. Today, the Timbro Sharing Economy Index, right here, Timbro Sharing Economy Index is being launched by 9 partner think tanks simultaneously around the globe. Here in DC, Costa Rica, Indonesia, Australia, Malaysia, Sweden, and here in DC. You're encouraged to tweet on this as we have a couple of speakers talking about the Timbro Sharing Economy Index findings at hashtag TSEI, the Sharing Economy Index. And the Timbro Sharing Economy Index is the first effort of its kind. Congratulations to Timbro and its research team for this achievement. It's groundbreaking, it's extremely helpful, and it's going to teach us a great deal about international comparisons on the sharing economy, the gig economy, Uber, Airbnb, and the many, many other kinds of sharing economy, gig economy industries and companies. The index tests a number of hypotheses on the correlation between the development of the sharing economy, how fast it develops, how much it develops, and the regulatory context that it lives in. Are these new services or services that are provided in new ways helped or hurt by high levels of government involvement in the economy? Is the speed manager for Timbro? Lydia.
Thank you, Grover, so much, and thank you all for coming to this event. We at Timbro are very proud, of course, to finally be launching this index. We've been working on it for almost 2 years now, and yeah, it's just a great pleasure. And also, of course, welcome to you all watching this online. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all the partnering organizations for the launch, including here in the US, Americans for Tax Reform and Property Rights Alliance, in Australia, Australian Taxpayers Alliance, in Serbia, CAAS, in Indonesia, Center for Indonesian Policy Studies, in Costa Rica and Malaysia, IDEAS, and also the Institute for Market Economics in Bulgaria, and finally the FOR in Poland. And as Barbara said, you're encouraged to please ask questions and tweet using the hashtag TSEI. So, the political response to the sharing economy has differed across the board. And perhaps Sweden is one of the countries where this has become the most interesting, because Sweden is caught between 2 competing ideals. First, being a tech-friendly country with high internet penetration on the one hand, and having very strong labor unions, and a very rigid housing market regulation on the other hand. So the questions that the growing sharing economy rise expose the problems that the Swedish system has, and which is also why it's a natural question for Timbro to address. But it's not only for Timbro, it's for the entire freedom movement that this is important. Because the sharing economy is redefining capitalism itself. It makes us all micro-entrepreneurs. So this, as we were listening to before from the Mercatus Center, how is the freedom movement going to respond to this new development that we're seeing? So this is one of the things that I hope that we will touch upon today. And with that, I would like to leave the floor back to Grover Nordquist. Thank you.
Lydia. Oops. Lydia, thank you very much. I think the whole expansion of the sharing economy, the gig economy, and this is, people talk about being disruptive. Disruptive is somebody is fracking and coming up with a new cost structure for oil and natural gas. This is corporate civil disobedience. I mean, there aren't laws for a lot of these new industries, and therefore they're outlaws. I mean, what they're doing in many cases is to start, Uber, every city it went into, is breaking the law. Because the laws were written as if it didn't exist, because it didn't exist. And the laws were written to not have it exist somehow. So this is a dramatic new approach, and to begin Timbro's leadership and beginning to study how it's playing out in various countries, extremely exciting. It's now my pleasure to introduce Alexander Funke. Alexander is the head researcher at the University of Pennsylvania. He holds a PhD in applied mathematics at the Center for the Study of Cultural Evolution, Stockholm University Department of Mathematics, ABA in theoretical philosophy from Linköping University, a Master of Science in Pure Mathematics from Stockholm University, Stockholm, Sweden, and a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science at Uppsala University in Uppsala, Sweden. He's currently a postdoctoral researcher at the University of Pennsylvania with their Philosophy, Politics, and Economics program. He previously completed a network fellowship at Edmund J. Safra Center for Ethics, Harvard University in Cambridge, and in 2011 he was also a visiting scholar at the Center for Public Choice, George Mason University in Virginia in the U.S. Alexander.
Thank you, Grover, and thank you for having us here. And I'm terribly excited to be able to wrap up something that's occupied a lot of my time and a lot of other people's time. So let me see the clicker. So here we are. No? Here we're not. All right. So, and a lot of other people's time. This is a project that's been ongoing for almost 2 years. It's an effort by a research team where I was part. The other two researchers, Andreas Berg of Lund University and the Research Institute for Industrial Economics back in Stockholm, and Joachim Wernberg at the Swedish Entrepreneurship Forum. Other key contributors has been, and I just want to mention briefly, Kate Dildy, that stems out of this very city, and our Icelandic economist, Gylfi Olafsson. As I said, we spent almost 2 years trying to perfect what we're doing. 12 people have been recruited through the sharing economy to help out and work for months via a service called Upwork. 4 developers in the Philadelphia area was part of developing what we used in order to collect the data, and we'll see more about that. And I'd like to thank Timbro for being on board with us from the very beginning to now, making this happen. It was an ambitious project, and I'm very happy that it actually turned out to be something as nice as it did. And also I'm very happy that we have all these other partners for the launch, and especially Americans for Tax Reform, hosting this now, bringing all these good people together, and tacos. Who doesn't like tacos? Why do we care about the sharing economy? Is it something different? People do care about the sharing economy. It's just a fact. Last week we saw these things out in the big publications, like Wired and Economies. Sharing economy stirs up emotion. There is this aspect of it that it's disrupting, that it's something new, that it sets things in new orders that we aren't used to, and therefore it's something that we need to understand. And one of those things when this happens is that there is a lot of claims being made, but since we have so little data about what is actually happening, those claims are easily made, but we want to have this data set in order to start seeing what is actually true, and that's one of the things that we hope to achieve. So the sharing economy is something that took off in 2012 of sorts, and had this amazing hype in 2015 where you could get money by saying Uber of anything, and that was an investment plan. Since then, the sharing economy perhaps has matured. The problem with the sharing economy as it grew, of a sort, was, as a concept that is, it was very popular. Being a sharing economy actor was something you wanted to be, so a lot of people claimed they were. So what actually is the sharing economy is a little disparate, the understanding of what's included. So one of the really major efforts here is to define the sharing economy in a way that matches how people have spoken about it before and the research literature that exists. So one of the interesting things, and one of the things that kind of triggered me is with about the sharing economy is like, is it a new thing? Is it really a new thing? Isn't this just same old market economics? And it is. It's just market economy, but it's market economy in a new certain type of way because the sharing economy platforms are allowing us to lower transaction costs, so new things are put on the market. So household items that previously were kept exclusively for ourselves can now be shared, and therefore we have a increase in efficiency and thereby growth. And growth in a way that actually isn't using more resources. So there is many ways of being happy about this kind of growth, no matter where on the political spectrum you are. So one claim here is that this is a new origin of wealth of sorts. Perhaps not as important as Adam Smith's The Father of Economics of sorts, who identified the division of labor as this really, really striking origin of wealth. And I want to make an analogy, and in order to make that analogy, I want to first note that in order to do this act of sharing, you need to actually have something to share, right? So sharing economy actually relies on property of some sort, not necessarily property in the very strict sense, but it could just be your usage privileges, which is a sort of property, right? So what we're looking here is to think about an analogy to division of labor, where we're looking at the division of ownership, or the specialization of ownership of items that we all owned before, or at least the people that are well off. So this specialization of ownership unlocks this idle capacity, which is what we've, as the sharing economy has been around, has been stressed a lot. But it also does other things. So it provides a very valuable freedom for a lot of people to live their lives as they like to live them. Have more freedom to choose when they work, how they work, and what they do for work. It also does something interesting, which we see in Iceland, which we will see is a good example of a sharing economy country, where it helps to increase the flexibility of the supply in case of demand spikes. So if all of a sudden your market for accommodation just has this major spike of demand, building new hotels takes a little while. Setting up new businesses to build new hotels takes even longer. Having all this excess capacity that you are able to unlock whenever it's actually really valuable for you to do so is something I saw in my current city of Philadelphia when the Pope visited. All of a sudden, my not so very expensive neighborhood rented for a crazy amount of money. And a lot of people was introduced into the sharing economy and keep renting out after that to more reasonable amounts. So, but it also can help us, and this is a little bit of a new point, it can also help us to specialize in the same sense as for the labor division. So we can learn how to manage, how to maintain, how to risk management, and even have this entrepreneurship with items. So if I have a very beautiful house, I might not need to have this beautiful car that I also take care of, because I can have this transport arrangement. So I don't need to necessarily own everything. Or if I do, I can also make money on the side. So it creates a way of actually transforming ownership, if we would see that day. It certainly hasn't yet, but it is something new in that sense. So what does this mean? And I already said some of this. Like, sharing economy has been promised to do a lot of things. It could reshape the economy, or re-coordinate on some new cultural norms. There might be new institutional needs so that what we see as the government should change in relation to economy or the economics in order for us to see more growth. It might also, and some claim, force a societal change that we don't want to have. And all these claims are just up in the air, and these are the sort of things that we hope that the Sharing Economy Index over the years will help us to sort the facts from the myths. Now, all that is good, so we should care about sharing economy. But what is the Timbro Sharing Economy Index that we're presenting today? Well, it's a ranking of the size of the sharing economy. We have 213 countries included. It's a composite indicator, which means that we actually use more than one sort of data. So we combine data of the number of active suppliers that we essentially use counted, and I'll get into more of that, as well as the amount of internet traffic that is attracted to the landing pages of the sharing economy sites. And before I get into this properly, I want to really go through our definition, because one of the things that we really think that we added is that we know what we're measuring, and I want to share that with you, and I want to make clear what we mean by the sharing economy. So I'll go through this properly. So there are three entities in a sharing economy. There's a supplier, there's a platform, and there's a demander. Now the supplier has a bunch of inputs. So he might have spare time, he might have a car. He can then create a service, which is a transportation service. This is your ride sharing, right? The platform then does something to this service. It packages it without changing the nature of the service itself. So what it does is that it adds things that makes us have reasons to trust this driver, for instance, by vetting, by reviews, by just providing the convenience of paying on your cellular phone, of setting up to ride, and so forth. So the demander now can buy a packaged service that was not previously on the market, and therefore we have created a transaction that otherwise wouldn't have taken place. So that was the preamble. So now I'm going to go through the definition, and I'm actually going to go through it because there are some things I want to point out here in each section. So a sharing economy platform is a platform that facilitates agreements between identifiable suppliers of marketable services and identifiable customers demanding said services. So a key aspect here is the peer-to-peer. If there is supply that is then anonymized, we don't consider it a sharing economy service. That's a different kind of service, an interesting case as well, but for us this relation is one of the key aspects of what we think is a sharing economy service. And we say that because that's how it's been treated before. The transaction may not involve any transfer of ownership and is conducted on a case-by-case basis, where neither party is bound to engage in future transaction. And here there's two things I want to lift out. So the first one is that it isn't allowed to involve any transfer of ownership. So something like eBay is not a sharing economy service. And the reason why we want to do that is because you're not really sharing, are you? You're selling or you're gifting. You're not sharing the thing because you're giving away your ownership. So we don't consider that sharing. It's a different thing. And on a case-by-case basis, it just means that it needs to be a one-shot thing. It can't be that you're doing this and then you're set for life. The recruitment bureau is not a platform service of the sharing economy type. So that's what we want to say there. A platform must lower the cost of transactions beyond merely providing advertisements. And here it's kind of, if we didn't have this clause, and it might not seem clearly or as clearly right now, but if you just think about what Google does, Google is not a sharing economy service. We all agree about that. But Google does provide advertisement for everything we buy online. So they seem like a sharing economy service in that sense, connecting us to suppliers and so forth. So we want something that provides something more that actually do package. And the last thing I want to say is the sharing economy platform, it's not the last thing. This is the second to last thing, I promise. The sharing economy platform is distinct from the supplier and does not refine or significantly transform the supplier's input to the supplied service. And this is important because if we're thinking about a restaurant, like an artisanal restaurant, we don't want to think that that is a sharing economy that shares produce. Because what they actually provide is the service of a meal, which is essentially a very different thing. So what we want to, when we're thinking about sharing economies platforms, is things that package and not refine or change. We have this really odd, we have this odd artifacts here. So, but I'm sorry about that, but we'll get through it. And now, lastly, the supplier must at least partially make use of excess capacity for production inputs that combine to produce this final good or service listed. So think about hotels.com or Expedia or something like that. Why is that not a sharing economy service? It's not because the suppliers are companies, but the reason is that the suppliers went into their investments for the sole reason that they were going to use all the capacity to sell this service. And that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for people that are using excess capacity. And how we're working with this when there are corner cases is that if the service itself was constructed to achieve this goal, that's a sharing economy service. So there's a lot of cases where you have a little bit of both. Okay, so why should you care about this specific index? Well, for first, it's the only index that is global. There are other efforts to measure things, and we have 213 countries. But almost all other efforts to measure the sharing economy has had a large drawback. That drawback being that it's been based on self-reporting. It's been based on questions like how many times during the last 3 months did you use a sharing economy service? And then it's really, really important what you, as the respondent, think a sharing economy service is. And when we went through this, we can see that what people have thought a sharing economy service is, even within the literature, varies a lot. So this is really indices of something that we don't really know what we're measuring. So we're getting away from that, because we're using the exact definition of the sharing economy that we just saw, that was created primarily to make it operationalizable in the sense that we can collect and classify data in relation to it. And the end effect of this that we want to do, and I mentioned it before, is that we want to see what the determinants are, what the effects are, which statements are thrown around that are true. But I should mention that where we are today is that we took a lot of time to create a product that is a data set. So a lot of what you will see here now today is mainly descriptive. But we will look at some of the determinants where we had some first looks of the results. And here's some of the good stuff. So this is the top 20 of the Timbro Sharing Economy Index. If we look at those countries, one thing we can notice is they tend to be small, modern, internet-savvy economies that are, to a large degree, tourist-fueled. And that makes sense because as a tourist, you don't need to assume a new idea of what ownership is. You already have the way that a transport economy that we can think about, would have you think about your ownership when you're abroad or when you're traveling. Like, you don't want to buy everything. You want to use services. You want to use the things that are available. And you want to do it in an affordable manner. So that's what the sharing economy can do, and that's what it does already. If we're looking at the world at large, we have the usual suspects. So the rich world is doing well. The not so rich world is not doing quite as well, and it's the thing where you can plot almost anything, and what you're actually plotting is GDP. So this is the case here as well. So what's interesting and what tells us something is when we're looking at smaller samples of countries that are more alike, or where we're doing regressions where we're controlling for things like GDP or internet. What's it called? Yeah, availability or indeed. So, very good. And in order to understand a data set, it's kind of one of those cases where you really want to know how they made the sausage, because that's what the data set is. So I'm going to go through this. I'm going to go through the 4 steps of what is the Sharing Economy Index. And the Sharing Economy Index started with classification. So we have a definition, now we're going to apply it. So first of all, we didn't make up this raw list of services from nothing, but we used every large list of things that were vaguely related to the sharing economy. There were collaboratives of consumption.com, the people that share Botsman's page. There were the mesh. Unfortunately, most of these resources are not available online anymore, but we used them in order to have this first raw list. So if you want to go through this definition that you saw, there's a lot of questions you need to ask in order to see if it fulfills all the criteria. So we did that. And we did that using 12 workers that were contracted using the sharing economy itself. So we trained them via Skype sessions. We built a specific platform or an application for them to efficiently indicate whether they fulfill the criteria and the motivation and how sure they were and so forth. So we have very good data quality and can go back and forth and rehash this. And the intention is to open up this database and have it living and have people contribute so that we have a global list that everybody agrees on what's sharing economy services. Only 286 services passed the needle's eye, so that's less than 7%. And those are the ones that we will be measuring. The first measure that we did is the really grand one. So for developers in Philadelphia, around where I live, we're set to write software to automatically go through websites, essentially to count how many suppliers are there, how many active suppliers are there. And we did that with 23 different services, the biggest one being Airbnb. This is our millions of suppliers, and because we're doing this in an automatic way, we need to do it in a way so that no website was hurt during the collection of this data. And the reason why we want to do, or rather that implies that this actual exercise takes money. So we go through, we have 3 million different requests on Airbnb alone. So this is a large venture, and it's a very rich data set. So rich that this data set is actually geo-coordinated. So what we've done here is this is not the sharing economy index. This is solely for these 23 sites where we calculate the active suppliers. So we can do this on a state level here. We can also do it on county level. We can do it on street level. We can do it on street level in Haiti. This is a global geo-coordinate system where we have, for a smaller fraction of the sharing economy, really, really interesting and viable data to answer a lot of questions. The other indicator that we have is internet traffic. So the internet traffic, we're buying data from one of those best practice viewership type of data. You think about how they measured TV usage back in the days. You install the box, you install the program, they follow what you do, you get paid for it. And this is a large thing that's been around for a very long time. So large that we have data for 213 countries. Not all the countries have a lot of usage of all the services, clearly. Some of them certainly don't. But we have 286 sharing economy service, 213 countries. And the only caveat with this sort of data that we collected is that it is the websites. And this is actually a little problematic for some services that are extremely app-centric. You think Uber or something like that. So how often did you go to Uber.com? Not very often, right? So we're not really capturing the full essence of app-centric services. But in order for this to be a problem, there needs to be a large discrepancy over how the app-centric and web-centric services usage is distributed over the planet. And we don't think that it normally is, but there are cases where this is problematic. So, for instance, countries that have been outlawing rideshare are not properly punished, so to speak, in the sharing economy index. So that's something I want to... We're doing this as an annual thing, and additional data sources will eventually, given that we get access to them, clear out this problem. And this is still certainly the index that says the most, and just want to make that clear. This is a problem, but it's not the big one. So, what do we do with these two indices? Well, they are country-level indicators that we want to combine in some way, and we're doing it in the simplest way possible. So they are normalized, what's called Z-score, and then we're taking the mean between the two. And the good thing about that is it's extremely transparent. It's easy to understand what we've done, and it's something that people and organizations do. Among one of those that do exactly this in the same ways, Transparency International for their very trusted corruption perception index, or very much used. Now we know something about what the sharing economy index is. So how can you actually use it? Well, I want to say that we're doing some first looks here at some claims in order to see what the sharing economy index can tell us. And one of the first claims here is related to social trust. Social trust is here meant to be the trust that you have in strangers on a country level. So it seems to be kind of clear that you don't want, if you're in an untrusting country, you wouldn't want to let anybody into your house. So it seems like you need social trust. But there's also another aspect of it where the sharing economy platforms actually are there to solve a trust issue where there's not enough trust. So they come in, they have vetting, they have juridical assistance, they have other ways of making us trust the platform and thereby trust the supplier. So it's not really clear, but country level social trust correlates with almost everything that's good. And it correlates with the sharing economy index. But one of the things that we can see is that if the social trust was only, or was the key determinant, then we would expect it to remain significant, even if we control for other really distinct variables. And I hold broadband penetration as a quite distinct variable, and what we see here is we lose significance when we control for broadband. And one of the possible explanations might be this dual role of social trust. But it remains to see, but this is a first look at some of the claims. Another claim is that the sharing economy has a different institutional needs than the rest of the market economy. It's just a different animal. It needs to have another type of state in order to flourish. Now, if that was true, and if we accept that what causes growth is actually economic freedom, which I think people in this room does to a large extent, then, and certainly the correlations are telling us that, and we have good reason to believe. But then if this was really different, we would expect that we had no correlation with the economic freedom and the size of the sharing economy. But at least no correlation. It might also be a negative correlation, as we'll see that others have made other claims that would lead to that. But to the contrary, it correlates very strongly. Again, controlling for broadband actually makes the significance drop a little. So even here, it might be that there's other things involved. It's not strange. We have 213 countries. We have 236 services. That everything worked the same would be odd. But we can see that the sharing economy does require economic freedom in order to have the things around that promotes it, such as broadband in this case. Okay, so the last one, which is the clearest result that we have from this initial look is the sharing economy merely an invasive enterprise? Is the sharing economy only out there to evade regulation? Is it only this kind of outlaw bandit sort of thing? And if that was true, so I forgot to mention that the economic freedom index that we're using is economic freedom of the world, Fraser's index. And we look at two of their sub-indices here, so the legal integrity index and the regulatory freedom index. And if we would think that what it actually is used for is to circumvent regulation, the more the regulation to circumvent, we would think that we would see more of the sharing economy. To the contrary, we find a strong positive correlation. It does not seem to be the case on a world level. And I'm just going to check my time here. How are we doing? I couldn't. We're doing. So the conclusion is, this is the first index that we got in the world that is truly global. This is an index that includes 213 countries and 236 services. It is the first way to start looking at claims that are made on a global level, where you're saying that this inherently leads to that. This is the first thing where you can start looking at those things. And from here on, I just want to say that we're doing this annually, so at this time we have a cross-sectional data set where you can compare countries. In the future you can see what actually were done in countries and how does that affect the sharing economy going forward, and what size of the sharing economy is going to affect the country's performance overall going forward. And there was an error. I think that was it though, and I'm very happy to be here again, and I'm very proud to have this to present after a long and interesting project. And I hope that a lot of you can find use for it. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander. We now have a panel that will be discussing the findings. John Karch will be organizing the panel, then we'll do questions and answers after the panel. John Karch.
Thank you very much. Each month we host an off-the-record sharing economy working group for free market think tanks, and we call upon a variety of experts to come and tell us about the regulatory hurdles that they're running into in the real world. And one of them is Matthew Kiesling. Matthew Kiesling is Vice President of Short-Term Rental Policy at TravelTech. And Matthew, throughout his career, has had a lot of interactions with regulators on the state level, local level, county level, you name it, he's dealt with it. And believe me, they get very creative with their enforcement of the regulations. So it's my pleasure to introduce Matt Kiesling of TravelTech, which you can go to by traveltech.org.
So thank you for having me. Extremely encouraged by the global index. It's great to see. So as John said, I've worked on short-term rental policy now 4 years, which basically makes me a dinosaur in the sharing economy industry. And I have worked with regulators around the country, lawmakers around the country. It's an extremely interesting and also a very challenging landscape. As you can imagine, we saw some of the headlines when we started off today, right? In New York City, last week passed a new ordinance that not just is aimed at curtailing folks who want to share their homes in New York City, but is also after data, which is kind of ironic. We've watched the founder of Facebook paraded all over the globe and asked about data, and now we have regulators looking for everything down to bank accounts in New York City. So it is an extremely challenging environment. That said, we've also seen some good things happen at the state level. We've had some good leadership out of folks in Arizona like Governor Ducey and now Congresswoman Lesko, setting out laws that have been designed to protect homeowners and allow them to share their homes, and that have told municipalities you can't trample on the property rights or the right of these folks to earn a living by sharing their homes. Similar action out of Indiana this past year, and so those are encouraging signs, but nonetheless, municipalities are getting creative and more creative by the day. And we as an industry, TravelTech, who represents short-term rental platforms like HomeAway, VRBO, Airbnb, Booking.com, are increasingly getting dragged into the fray. For a large portion of time, this was about the homeowner and about us trying to help protect homeowners' rights and people's ability to share their homes. But increasingly, we're being called upon to be the middleman for enforcement and compliance. And it's becoming troubling. There's a lot of platform liability attached to a lot of the new laws and new regulations that have come up in recent years. It presents a number of challenges, not just for us, but also for the homeowners that our member companies try to serve. So it is a challenging landscape, but one that we'll continue to try to work through. And I'm encouraged by an index like this that helps quantify some of what we need to talk to policymakers about, and goes beyond just sort of the anecdotal stories that we tell. So thank you for having me.
Next, my pleasure to introduce from the Mercatus Center, and if you may have seen the Mercatus Center's book called Permissionless Innovation. If you haven't seen that, I encourage you to read it. But Mercatus has many fine scholars, including Dr. Michael Farron, who among his many policy expertises is also an engineer, which is impressive. So Dr. Michael Farron, Mercatus Center at George Mason University, and that's also mercatus.org. Dr. Farron.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Alexander and Timbro and everyone that has worked so hard to make this sharing economy index a reality. Working in this space for the last several years, again, I'm a dinosaur as well, you really get an impression of what you don't know. You know that there's a lot going on, but it's really hard to understand the true scope of it. So getting that handle on things is really important, and we're really grateful that for all of Timbro's hard work. The area of research that I look at on a daily basis is focused on essentially what a lot of people would call cronyism, or how economic special interests twist government authority in order to essentially gain their own benefits and push other people out of the market, how to create market advantage for themselves. And so the sharing economy, especially with regard to Uber and Lyft and Airbnb, has been a major piece of that research in the past few years. And the way that I look at the sharing economy in general is that it faces two major things. The first challenge to the sharing economy is that it's a disruptor, because it displaces established interests, especially with taxis. That's the clearest example of it. But it's also a disruptor to regulators, because the platform offers a end run around the established regulators, because in many ways, platforms can regulate their own service providers better than the regulators can. They have better information on them. And when you have a situation like this, you have an existential threat to regulators. And so I think that's one of the reasons why we've seen so much hostility against the sharing economy throughout the world. And that you're starting to see, like you mentioned in New York City, that the regulators, now that they have a reduced role, are now demanding that the platform firms essentially become their own vassals to help them reestablish their regulatory authority. And this kind of ties in something that John said, that my colleague Adam Thier has worked a lot on, the concept of permissionless innovation. It's an idea that was kind of originated with Rear Admiral Grace Hopper back in the 80s, when she at least was the first person to, in writing, coin the term that sometimes it's easier to ask for forgiveness than for permission. But we should instill this as a cultural moral, rather than a thing just to get around the rules that you find inconvenient. We should allow innovators to find new ways to serve people and to make their lives better. And the important thing behind this is that it really does make people's lives better. I was reading recently about the taxi violence that occurs in South Africa. And the taxi market was opened up in 1987. And it caused a flood of poor entrepreneurs into the market seeking to make their lives better. And if you look at Uber and Airbnb and a lot of these sharing economy platforms, what they are used by is people on the lower end of the economic stratum trying to make their lives better, and they're getting around essentially the coordination problem, the transaction cost problem that large firms have emerged to deal with. So the best thing that we can do is get more information on the sharing economy, get more understanding of how it makes ordinary people's lives better, and encourage this kind of idea of permissionless innovation and evasive entrepreneurship, a sort of technological disobedience is what my colleague Adam Thier calls it, and use that to essentially help me make people's lives better into the future. Thanks very much to Timbro for your work.
And to conclude the panel, we'll have Philip Thompson. He's a policy analyst at the Property Rights Alliance. And right after this, we'll go into Q&A. So Phil at the Property Rights Alliance, he helps publish, it's an annual index that's been going since 2006. And actually, Hernando de Soto lends his name to this index. And again, we want to thank Timbro for being our Swedish partner in this annual launch. So it's my pleasure to introduce Phil Thompson, Property Rights Alliance.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Dr. Funke, and thank you, Timbros, for choosing ATR Property Rights Alliance to launch the Sharing Economy Index. And we've heard a little bit about reputational mechanisms, so I hope you can give us a good review. At Property Rights Alliance, we're excited about the Sharing Economy Index because it can be used to shed light on the barriers to using property in the new digital e-commerce space. As many of you know, property rights make property possible. They determine the balance of ownership and in many cases what people can do with their property. They protect the freedom of property owners to voluntarily exchange, lease, hold, leverage, or do whatever they want with their stuff. This helps determine price signals and forms the foundation of the market system. Douglas North, the founder of the New Economic School, said, an essential precondition for price-making markets is the existence of well-documented and enforced property rights for the goods and exchanges, for goods and services being exchanged. However, property rights require norms for mutual exchanges to occur at a large scale. The Sharing Economy Index reveals to us that in this early stage of internet peer-to-peer services, norms are still working their way through the system. Some countries and municipalities have blocked certain services and allowed others. Some have, and in others, layers of regulations leave suppliers and users hindered by uncertainty. Ultimately, when it comes to transactions through these online peer-to-peer services, the sharing economy property rights need to be more uniform and universal and provide more certainty. By identifying transactions, users of the app economy, the Sharing Economy Index serves as a useful resource for researchers to examine the sector as its own entity. This is not to say that the sharing economy is independent from the economy as a whole. There's only one economy. However, this segment certainly has its own unique characteristics, which the Sharing Economy Index did a great job of defining despite its complexity. And hopefully as it evolves, it will embrace more classical liberal definitions of property rights. The second reason I'm excited about the Sharing Economy Index is its disruptive trust-enabling features. The benefits of the current property rights system, the legal titles, deeds, copyrights, and patents, and other formal documents of property rights allow billions of voluntary exchanges each day, are basically trust-enabling features. They, as formal records issued by the government, give assurance to users that their transactions are legal, protected, and deserve all the benefits of the formal system. The reputation reporting mechanisms inherent in the sharing economy threaten the government's monopoly on property rights conveyance. In other words, by removing a third party, the formal legal storefront, the peer-to-peer networks enable trade to happen, potentially at greater scale, despite losing the assurances offered by the traditional governing system. Actually, the index references a study by a French ride-hailing app where the users said they trusted drivers who were complete strangers more than they trusted their friends and coworkers. And that was in France. So the France group left. In all seriousness, if the reputation system proves as a substitute for formal occupational licenses at a scale equivalent to the government system today, the potential disruption would be quite profound. So I look forward to see how it develops next year, and we can measure this over time. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move to the Q&A portion. We have people with microphones, so please raise your hand, make yourself visible. For anybody watching online, pose your question, use the hashtag TSEI, and we'll keep an eye out for those questions. But let's get started within the room. Are there any questions in the room, especially for Alexander? Whatever. Give your name and affiliation, please.
Howard Woolridge with Citizens Opposing Prohibition. Just curious, I belong to Warm Showers, Inc., where if you're a bicycle person, you can stop at my house, spend the night for free. Does the index only address people making money, or do you also do, because it's a share, I share my house, but I don't make any money. Do you have any information, or are you looking at how much people share without remuneration, without money?
Thank you. So yes, we do include those, and we include things like couch surfing or the type of service that you provide. But we don't distinguish in the index at this point, so we don't know how much is what. But yes, those are part of the index indeed. Anybody else have a question? Here we go.
I wonder if anybody here could tell about what states or what cities in the U.S. are more prone for a sharing economy versus others. what are free or what are not free.
I'm so sorry. Okay. Okay, I thought that I could do this in here. Okay, so we had a wow, this is terrible. We had a slide. We actually have also have a slide here. That's the whole world. But the other slide was with the heat map. I don't think I should use this. Sorry. Okay. That was funny in itself. But we also have this heat map that was earlier in the slides, where we have the U.S. states. I don't know if you're able to find it. But I can tell you that it's similar to where we see the countries. So here we go. So DC has a lot of people coming in and out. Hawaii, Alaska, Colorado, Connecticut, I don't know, but Montana and Florida for sure, and are these tourist-fueled economies within the U.S. Other large cities certainly also has more of a temporary notion to them, and it's easy to see that these are the things that could drive it. An interesting thing about the bottom, I think, is that a state such as Texas, that is economically doing so well, does not have a very large sharing economy per capita. And so there is something going on there, and we can see it also in the world at large that there might be. Sorry, now I'm speculating, but there might be cultural aspects to how you think about your property and how you think about exclusivity, especially in a kind of rural to urban sense. So yeah. Thank you.
Yes, Manuel Rosales for the Latino Coalition. I was just going to ask in reference to the pushback from regulators, in reference like to New York, they were going to ban the usage of apartments or other facilities, and also the taxi drivers in reference to the Uber and Lyft. So was that part of your analysis?
It's not part of our analysis at this point. It's one of those things that we really want to look at, but I can just say some words on that. That there is, I mean, a legitimate concern about vested interests where they see that they are not on a level playing field, and sometimes you need to ask, where should the level be? I mean, just because we're not on a level playing field doesn't mean that we should regulate sharing economies to work as hotels. It might be that at this point we actually have better informational access and can make our judgment about what kind of hotel we want to live in. So yeah, but I think these people are better.
Yeah, Michael or Matthew?
From my experience, and Matthew, maybe you can corroborate this, New York City is probably the absolute worst in terms of sharing economy regulations. I believe that probably Arizona in general is about the best in terms of the most friendly regulatory environment. So essentially what you have is regulatory cultures and reflecting the personalities of the people in power and whether or not they like the idea of a disruptor or whether they think that the disruptor is simply, tearing up the status quo. And status quo, when you tear up the status quo, you mess with people's established power paradigms. And that's a problem for those currently in power.
Yeah, I'd echo that sentiment. I mean, the cities that we've seen take the toughest tact from a regulatory perspective are places like Miami, Chicago, New York City, Boston recently. We saw the same thing play out in San Diego last week, the banning of all second homes as short-term rentals. Those cities have taken a very strong look at their hotel footprint, I would presume. There's also quite a bit, and Airbnb, I think, made no secret about this in New York City, published the donor records of the hotel industry, and it was close to $1 million across the city council. Unsurprising that New York came to the conclusion that it was time to shut down short-term rentals. So you're seeing that play out from entrenched interests for sure.
Thank you. I'm John Utley with the American Conservative magazine. Can you go over the world, if you can, in several concepts? I know South America, where there's a lot of street crime. Does that help this industry, or does it people feel safer with you than etc.? If you can address countries where there's a lot of crime, Other than Germany, I thought they'd forbidden it in France, the European socialist countries. Do they forbid it, or is it just Uber that have other countries? Can you go over the world, if you can, the highlights of different countries?
So I could, but I'm a little reluctant because I don't really have the best information on everything. But what I can tell you is, when it comes to Europe, there is a big discrepancy over how countries have faced this, and I think that is going to be something that is going to be revealing using this index, because it's countries that to a large extent share a regulatory framework, at least the EU countries, and at least, if not the regulatory framework, where you see small differences in relation to the sharing economy, they have similar economic situations and so forth. So for Europe, there is just there's a bunch of different solutions. And I think that your question about crime is really important and interesting. We haven't yet looked at that. And we can see that in South America that there are some countries that have very strong sharing economies, such as Brazil, Chile, and Argentina, whilst others do not. And the reason for why they are there, or the difference, we haven't really disentangled yet. There's so much data and so much to do, and this is kind of an opening for what we hope to inspire others to join in and discover what is driving what. But when it comes to crime, as you mentioned, it is one of those interesting things that Uber, for instance, helps to get drunk people off the street, and people off the street so they don't need to meet the drunk people, given that drunkenness is a little bit of a, turns you a little nutty, some of us. Yeah. Thank you.
Hi. To the panel in general, and anyone who wants to answer this, I'm Dave Wallace, the Fair Energy Foundation. And today we see in Baltimore the same kind of situation playing out as what happened in New York. So from the panel, what kinds of tactics do you see that we would be able to combat the coalition of the large corporations who are so vested in their particular industries, the medallion holders, the large hotel chains, who are coming out against the sharing economy?
So that's actually one of the things that we've done a lot of work in our research and trying to figure out. The question is not why do special interests win? The question that's really interesting is when do special interests lose? And there's two main themes to that. One is when there is a social and cultural shift toward a different idea. And so that's one of the reasons why we're trying to encourage people to think about this idea of permissionless innovation, and why it's a good thing and why it's given us all of the amazing things that we have in our current future. The other piece of that is that the other theme is that sometimes it takes a special interest to fight a special interest. And what Uber and platform firms in general do by aggregating people together and say, hey, here's something that you really value, we can organize you really quickly to provide some sort of social pressure in our favor and in your favor, hopefully. I think that's the reason why Uber and Lyft and Airbnb to an extent have been more successful than, say, the taxi deregulation that occurred during the 80s that resulted in, within the next decade, taxi re-regulation as the special interests came back.
Yeah, I would say, what we're obviously seeing is the shift that you're talking about from a cultural perspective, right? 10 years ago, less than 5% of leisure travelers stayed in a short-term rental. We'll see that number at 1 in 3 by the end of this year. It's just, that's how people are choosing to travel because it provides them opportunities. You've got thousands of corporations that have signed their employees up and partnered with Airbnb so that their folks can use Airbnb when they're on the road instead of a hotel if they choose to. Those opportunities are there because that cultural shift is occurring. Unfortunately, we're not seeing regulators, and that's often the case in any industry, right? It doesn't catch up at the same time. And I can't speak to the taxi industry, but from a hotel perspective, when you talk about the hotel industry, part of this for them is about throwing sand in the gears. I mean, in the last year, you've seen most of the major hotel chains announce some sort of initiative to bring their own short-term rentals to the market. So they're not against short-term rentals, they're against somebody else's short-term rental.
Yes, I was wondering, can you tell me, you mentioned that one of the prongs does not adequately account for app traffic, so apps like Uber. Does your other prong account for that, or is that just a gap in the current data set?
So the other one does indeed, but it also is not for all of the services. So that indicator is for 23 services. And the unfortunate thing is that Uber and Lyft requires you to log in. And as you're logging in, you're agreeing that you're not going to collect data. So we do not. So Uber and Lyft is underrepresented in our index, but in the cases where they co-variate the app and the web kind of services that are centered on either web app or web, this is not a problem. In the cases that they do, and where we're trying to identify something that is specific to this, it is a problem. And we have good ideas on how to use the data that we have in a wiser way by kind of get qualitative data on how much are getting app and how much is coming from web in order to take the traffic data that we have and count it up after we have calibrated how much this should be counted up. But even better, and if anybody here is from Uber or Lyft and wants to make this index a greater thing, what we really want, and we tried to reach out before this happened, but here we could join together and get a much more complete data sets where we don't need to be what's the evasive entrepreneurship, that we don't need to be evasive entrepreneurs running around collecting data, but we can actually collaborate because it's in everybody's interest to know what the sharing economy is and what the implications are. So yeah.
Alexander, thank you. Lorenzo Montanaro from Property Right Alliance. Well, first of all, congratulations. I'm struck for your image because for the first time I see Italy that is better off than the United States. So number 26 and United States 53. So, but what really struck me is that Cuba is 25th. So it's better off than Italy and United States. It's not the perfect example of a free market system. Can you explain this data? Thank you.
I wish that I could do this in an authoritative, not to say, knowing what I'm saying. But what actually is the case is that I have friends that have been to Airbnbs in Cuba, and what they tell me is that one of the few ways you can actually be an entrepreneur in Cuba, leveraging some sort of property. It's not necessarily actual property, but you have usage rights. So you can take your usage right and you can use it on to put things on Airbnb and thereby make money. So this is kind of the small glimpse that they have into the capitalistic society becomes more important, I think, emphasized for that very reason. And I don't know if you know more about this than I do.
You've pretty much covered it.
Okay.
It's all anecdotal from what I know.
Okay.
How do they pay for it? In Cuba, the people don't have dollar accounts.
So I think they do. They probably need to, and I'm not really sure how. So I don't think they really can have cash. It might be that they are having someone outside of the country that has a credit card. I'm sorry, I don't know about the details of that.
So you just said you would like to include Uber and Lyft and other ride-sharing apps. What else is like your goal for the next index? What are the next steps that you could take?
So just doing the same thing again really transforms the data set because it goes from being a cross-sectional data set into a panel data where we can see what people actually, what countries actually did and what kind of effects they had. And when you do that and you have this big sample of countries, even with just a couple of years, you can actually learn a lot. So that's the biggest thing. And it's not that we don't have the ride-sharing applications at this point. It is just that I wanted to be very transparent about this caveat, and I think that my dear colleague thinks that I overemphasized it. But it's just to be transparent that this is something, when you're looking at these particular things where they ban a ride-sharing application, we might look at the data and that looks odd. And the reason is this. And for the places where they didn't, and we don't have a good reason to think that there's a difference in how app and web varies, this is not really an issue.
I'm curious on civil society. So we talk about the trust factor. So based on your research, or just, I know it's not quantitative, but in the era where nobody really talks to their neighbor and nobody talks to strangers much anymore, and we have all this interaction on shared economy platforms and the trust mechanism underlying the whole thing, do you think this can enhance civil society generally? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and there's a lot of people who have made that point. There's a law professor, I think he's out of Ohio, that has this TED Talk where he talks about how he was kind of already in the local society when he was visiting somewhere else, which means that we are making civil society connected as well. So we're not just increasing or making local civil society better, but we're making civil society around the globe understanding each other better, and we're not just caught up in specific places when we go and we're tourists. And when it comes to things that happen, so this is for traveling, when it comes to more the local transports, if we're keeping with the big giants, I think that we can all say that we met more people that we wouldn't have met before, that these people have enriched, and sometimes not. I mean, sometimes we don't have the best experience. But to the degree that it's affecting the civil society, I think that the anecdotal and even the personal accounts from almost everybody in this room, I hope, have said already made us see that this is really a change factor for civil society.
Hi there. I'm Joe Wheeler with the House Committee on Education and the Workforce, and as the name or my organization might indicate, I'm interested in the labor, the workers' side of the sharing economy. There's, of course, the sharing of assets, which you talk about, but also for Uber, Lyft drivers, folks engaging in other things, or sharing their labor or time. One of the things that we're seeing here in the United States is issues of independent contracting and within our own labor rubric. Can you speak to what some of the other countries, how their labor or wage and hour laws may be the same or different? I guess the ones that are, higher on your index at this point.
So I really don't have anything coherent to say apart from that the sharing economy, when it comes to the gig economy part of the sharing economy, is not that large in all countries. So it's a later stage of the sharing economy for most countries. So where we see the biggest chunk of it is essentially in the US and England, and I think those are the two big ones at this point. And why that is, if it is because of some regulation, that is exactly why the index is created, but I unfortunately haven't looked into that yet.
Hi, Dave Wallace again. I've got a question for the panel, two-part question. One is, are you going to be measuring, or have you already determined in any manner the differential between the earnings of an individual in the sharing economy compared to the earnings of an individual who's working within corporations where they do basically the same thing? And then the second part of this question, or the second question actually, is where do you see the elements of the sharing economy spreading? What are some of these quote, quote, new innovative areas where the sharing economy is going to grow? Thank you.
So let me do the first part. My memory. What was the first part? I'm sorry.
The wage differentials.
Yes.
Differentials, if you want to call them earnings. And
Right. No. This is not part of the Sharing Economy Index, and it's a very, very good project. And I wish someone does that. It's important data to have. So we made a choice early. Some of the other attempts at measuring this has looked at like turnarounds and how big is this financial impact and so forth. We wanted to see, and this is how we include gift, or not gift, but free services, or services that are costless at least, that how many are participating, how important is this in the economy, and then exactly what the sharing economy services are and what they do will then determine this. And in order to compare them, you need to do a much larger data collection for this specific topic, and it's a great thing, and I hope somebody does it.
Thank you for the question. So regarding whether or not, I think the bigger question is, rather than are the wages different or the earnings different, is part of why are the earnings different? And we have a structure in the U.S. Kind of like the congressman alluded to earlier, of where you have independent contractors or you have employees, and there's not much of a middle ground. Or if you're not an employee, you're automatically an independent contractor or something like that. And this dichotomous definition is actually part of the problem. The fact that we identify that you are now an employee and therefore certain regulations apply to you, and in the case of Massachusetts, just passed a law mandating family leave requirements for larger companies. And you can look at a family leave requirement as a very good benefit of working, but it's also a cost to employ someone. So as regulations amount that increase the cost to employ someone, then it increases the incentive to find an independent contractor way to get around that cost. And you might actually see, as a result, a lot more employment rather than necessarily higher wages. With regard to where innovation is going to go, what I would say is just think about anything that you do in your day-to-day activity, especially anything that happens to annoy you. And if there's something that it can somehow get done by someone else, like you're like, I'm really busy at the office today, and I'm hungry, I want to get lunch, but I don't really have time to go out and get it. Well, I can subcontract someone out to bring me a hamburger just from across the street even, so that I can keep up my productivity, something like that. And also, since I'm a transportation engineer, that's one of the areas I look at the most, and I look at the bird scooters and that sort of thing as platform firms being able to completely revolutionize not only our transportation systems, but our urban layouts by revolutionizing our transportation systems.
Thanks. Good answer.
Yeah, it's time, right? Where can you get time from in the sharing economy? And that's, I think, where the innovation comes. I will say an independent contractor issue, I think one of the challenges that everyone deals with in this space, the folks who are trying to study it, the folks who are trying to create policy around it, is a lot of sharing economy is not full-time jobs, right? It's what people are doing on the side. It's what they're doing for extra money. You know, it's taking them from one tax bracket to the next tax bracket, and what does that mean from a wage standpoint, and what does that mean from an employment standpoint? And it's something that we should be embracing because it's lessening the load, right, on this corporate idea of from point A to point B. People aren't doing that anymore, right? This is how this is changing. And a lot of times when we see these surveys or we see this research about what is the sharing economy's impact on wages, or what is the sharing economy's impact from a job perspective, the only folks that are taken into account in that are folks that are doing this stuff full time, not folks that have launched a business on the side through a site like Upwork, or driven on the side for Uber or Lyft, or have been able to acquire a second home or a vacation home by renting it out on the side. And I think that gets lost in a lot of this equation.
Howard Woolridge again. We talked mostly about the impact economically, and that's rightfully so, but somebody mentioned it just a second ago. I'd like just to re-emphasize the impact this can have on interpersonal relationships. I got a house near Perpignan. I go down to Boulangerie, I'm speaking some French to those people, I go up to Épicerie, blah, blah, blah. We need more in this world as we get more and more divided, more and more extreme. Anything to increase personal interaction. So when you're trying to sell the whole concept to liberals who are going to protect the unions and the taxi drivers, etc., I would just recommend emphasizing the fact that the more people can go people to people, because I've never seen an Airbnb or an Uber that says Republicans only or Democrats only. We need to have more of these interactions not less.
Hi, I'm Martin Gurria. I work for Moving, which is also an electric bike company from Europe. We have 14 cities, and we just launched a couple of weeks ago in Atlanta, Georgia. And I was surprised that you mentioned Bird, the scooter, but here it says that bike sharings and centralized supply are considered non-sharing, part of the sharing economy. I wonder what are your thoughts about that?
So my thoughts are that they aren't, indeed. And they are an important part of how to use, property owned by a central entity in a efficient manner, and they are important in transforming how we use our transportation system, and for many other reasons. But that doesn't make them a sharing economy. So not everything that's cool, new, fresh, and interesting is a sharing economy.
And I think just to follow up on that, one of the really valuable things about this index is that it lays out, this is the platform economy. This is the sharing economy, which is a subset of the platform economy. So I would call Bird more properly a form of the platform economy. And then the gig economy is a subset of the sharing economy as well. So kind of incorporating all of these concepts that we've been debating and discussing, but like not really having a good grasp on it. Setting up that kind of arrangement is really a useful part of the index.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I'm a Washington correspondent for Japanese Conservative Political Party, Happiness Resistance Party, and Happy Science Group in Japan. I'm a bit confused with the concept of, a very fundamental concept of sharing economy, because I have read an article a few years ago. It said some scholars see communism, like China or Soviet Union, on the horizon of sharing economy, and some others see the globalism, which is the enemy of conservative thinking, on the horizon of sharing economy. And could you clarify the concept of sharing economy regarding this criticism? Thank you.
I think it's a little bit that sharing economy has had many friends, and not everybody wanted to be friends with the sharing economy for a bit. And when it comes to socialism, it wouldn't be, if it's socialist, what do you call it, the state ownership sort of idea are acting as supplier to a sharing economy. They would be both the entity that's the platform and the sharing economy supplier, so it wouldn't be a sharing economy, because that was one of the things. It is also, it couldn't be centralized, which it would be. So for us, that's just not sharing economy. So the globalist thing, so personally, I don't think that is incompatible with the sharing economy. I think that one of the things that a sharing economy does well is to facilitate things for people that travel. And globalists tend to like that we travel, that we meet people from different cultures, that we try to understand each other and so forth, as was previously mentioned. So I don't think that there is any incompatibility there, unless I'm misunderstanding what you mean by globalist, but yes.
So
we're at time, so I just wanted to see if there's any last questions or comments for the panel. Well, with that, I want to congratulate Timbro and congratulate Alexander Funke for completing this report. Thank you very much. And I really encourage you to dig into this a little bit. And you'll see some case studies from around the world. And if you go to timbro.se is the general Timbro website, and to access this index is timbro.se/TSEI. So I want to thank everybody for coming today. Please thank our panelists, and please come and say hello to Alexander and the panel. Thank you so much.